Chapter 6, we're going to energy. Um, we're almost to the heart of this term. The heart, of course, being when we hit glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. So we're almost there. We're almost there. We've almost got all the foundational work done. So we're going to start with energy. Very, very important. So our author starts by telling us that the sun's energy is captured by the earth in photosynthesis. Okay, um, we, we've talked about why this is important to us. Okay, once upon a time, we were under the impression that all of life, on the earth depended on the sun's energy, and then some scientists went to the Galapagos Islands. They found these volcanic vents. They found these tube worms. They found these albino shrimp, albino crabs, albino geckos, albino salamanders, and all of a sudden we had to rewrite all the biology books and acknowledge the fact that this ecosystem, which was at the base of an island in a volcanic vent, hot enough to melt iron, was obtaining its energy from sulfur bonds in the vent. So definitely not definitely not sunlight. So that's the beautiful thing about life. That is truly the beautiful thing about life is that once you think you have it encapsulated, and once you think that you have it figured out, it finds yet one more exception to the rule. So any attempt on our behalf to try to encapsulate life is always going to be met by life redefining itself. So that is a beautiful thing. But for the rest of us, for the other 99.5.8% of us, this is true. We do depend on the harvest of energy from the sun's light. This is brought about by photosynthesis. That's one of the reasons that we did that lab last week. Okay. And what do we know? What does photosynthesis bring to us? Well, if you haven't figured it out yet, it brings two very important things. It brings food in the form of sugar, and it brings oxygen so that you and I can use that food that was created by them in this beautiful reaction called respiration. Okay, so to recap, we have a beautiful little plant. That plant carries out photosynthesis. And photosynthesis, you should know this by now, but we're going to cover in more detail in chapter 8. Okay, what are we doing? We're taking carbon dioxide, we're taking water, we're harvesting the energy in sunlight, and this plant is producing food, which is glucose, and oxygen. And then during respiration, you and I literally steal the food from these plants, because let's face it, guys, these plants are not making this food for us. They're making it for themselves. They're making food for a rainy day so that when they need to grow or divide, they have the energy to do that. Okay, that's the purpose for them to carry out photosynthesis, is for them to have energy, for them to have oxygen. But you and I take advantage of this, and we decide that we're going to eat this delicious little carrot and take all its hard work as it worked to accumulate sugars and produce oxygen for us. Okay, so photosynthesis. What two things does it create? You should have it tattooed at the inside of your brain by now. Food and oxygen. Another way of saying the same way, another way of saying the same thing, sugar and oxygen. Okay. So very important. Okay, what is energy? Energy can be defined as a capacity to bring about movement against an opposing force. Okay, what does that mean? Well, what force can you think of? I know the force that I think of is gravity. Okay, why? Because it's always affecting me. It's always trying to pull me to the center of the earth. Okay, so we are all in this gravitational field. Okay, so if you, I've got this weird thing popping up every once in a while. I apologize. I don't know how to turn it off. Anyways, here's a cup, right? Actually, you know what? I'm gonna I'm gonna stop share. There we go. You see me now? I'm gonna make me bigger. Right? We have a cup, and we know it's in a gravitational field. How do we know that? Because if I let it go, it falls. Boop, falls down, right? So it's in a gravitational field. So therefore, if I take this cup and I drink coffee from it, which I can't because it's empty, but if, let's imagine that I had delicious little coffee in there, right? Every time that I lift this cup to my lip to drink coffee from it, I need to invest energy because I am moving the cup against gravity. Additionally, and we're going to hit this in just a second, now that this cup is up here, as a type of energy is called potential energy. And the reason we call it potential energy is because we have stored that energy. And if I let go of the cup, that was noisy, that potential energy turns into the energy of motion, which is called kinetic energy. Okay? So anytime that I move against gravity, okay? Anytime that I move against gravity, I am investing energy. So you and me, because we are moving in a gravitational field that's very, very strong, anytime that we move from point A to point B, we are investing energy to do that. Okay? Let's go back to share here. Boop. There we are. Okay? So energy, the capacity to bring about movement against an opposing force. So the force due to gravity points down. So if I move something up, that is against the force of gravity. And so energy is being utilized. Okay, energy can be conceptualized as either potential energy, which is stored energy, or kinetic energy, meaning the energy in motion. Okay, so let's take a look at a D-cell battery. Does it have energy? Yes. Is it kinetic or potential? Well, if you answer potential, that's correct, because a D-cell battery has stored energy as chemical energy. Okay. What if I take a rubber band and I extend it, I pull on it? Do I have energy? If you said yes, that's correct. Is it potential or kinetic? If you said potential, again, you're correct. How do you know? Because that energy is stored. And how do I know that it's stored? Because the second that I let go of that rubber band is going to pull, turning that potential energy into kinetic energy. If I have a spring and I take that spring and I pull it apart, okay, and I leave it like that, then that spring has potential energy. If I take the spring and I press it together, that spring has potential energy. But when I let it go, then that potential energy turns into kinetic energy. If I have a gun and have a bullet in it, that bullet has potential energy in the chemical of the powder that is in the back of that bullet. It has stored energy, and a lot, because when you pull the trigger and that bullet comes out, it comes out very, very, very fast. So that means that a lot of potential energy got turned into a lot of kinetic energy. Okay, a water mill. Okay, you have water above, that's potential energy. As that water turns into kinetic energy and turns that water wheel to do work, we go from potential energy to kinetic energy. Okay, so it's important for you and I in biology to acknowledge that a lot of our energy is potential energy. Okay, the energy that allows us to move, that's kinetic energy, but the majority of it is potential energy, and it is stored in chemical bonds. Okay, it's important for you to know that. What chemical bonds? Well, proteins have potential energy in it. How do we know? Because a delicious little steak or a delicious little trout is mostly protein. And when we eat it, we harvest energy from it. Okay? Fats have potential energy. How do we know? Because when we consume margarine or butter, which is essentially fat, we harvest the energy off of that fat. Another source of energy for us is sugar. So when you eat a pastry or when you eat candy and you consume that sugar, that glucose or fructose, that is another source of energy. So in other words, protein, fats or lipids, and saccharides or carbohydrates are three different types of potential energy that are because they contain chemical energy in their bonds. Which bonds? Specifically, the carbon-carbon bonds. Okay, so when our bodies catabolize, we'll cover what that word means in a second, break down these carbon-carbon bonds, our body harvests energy. And the reason this is important is because it's going to be turned into yet another molecule, which is the currency of energy in our body. Okay, and right now I'm just going to tell you that it's ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Okay, let's move on here. So, thermodynamics. Okay, if you're talking about energy, you can't go very far without talking about thermodynamics. So, what does thermodynamics mean? Thermo means heat, which is a type of energy. It is the energy in molecular motion. Most effectively, the type of energy that you and I deal in, heat. Okay, dyna, if something is dynamic, then it is something that is moving. So therefore, thermodynamics is the study of the movement of heat. Okay, and it's actually very interesting because historically, thermodynamics was started by this guy by the name of James Watt, who wanted to calculate the efficiency of a steam engine. And now you can't throw a rock without talking about thermodynamics. We apply thermodynamics to cars. We apply it to people. We apply it to organisms. We apply it to ecosystems. So the study of thermodynamics is applicable to everything now. Okay, so we have no option. If you're studying energy, you have to study thermodynamics. Okay, and we start with the first law, and the first law tells us that under normal conditions, energy is neither created or destroyed, but is simply transformed from one state to another. Okay. Let me see here. There's a reason. Let me stop my share here. Hopefully you guys can see me. But let's go back to our cup. Okay. You see my cup? So we have a cup. What kind of energy does it have? potential energy. Now I'm going to let it go. Okay? So we went from potential energy to kinetic energy, and then it stopped. So the energy disappeared? No, that's not true. That's not true at all. Not by the first law. By the first law, okay, the fact that this cup stops when it hits the desk doesn't mean that that kinetic energy disappeared. It had to go somewhere. Where did it go? Well, some of it went to heat the top of the desk as the impact created molecular motion. And some of it, pay close attention, went into sound energy. That was a loud thump. And vibration, sound, is a type of energy. Okay, so we went from potential energy to kinetic energy to heat and sound energy. And then that heat and sound energy dissipated out into the cosmos, but it never ever disappeared. So what this is telling us is that when you start out with a certain amount of energy, you can have many transitions in that type of energy. You can go into very many different types of transitions, but the total amount of energy is never going to decrease. Okay, very, very interesting. So let's go back to share here. Okay, so the first law of thermodynamics tells us that energy is never created or destroyed, but it's only transformed from one form to another. Okay, the second law of thermodynamics states that energy transfer will always result in a greater amount of disorder in the universe. What in the world are they talking about? Well, effectively what they're telling you is that every time that you have an energy transition, the energy that results is frequently a lower grade energy. Okay, as in everything, there's always exceptions to the rule. But typically, when you go from one energy transition to another, you go from a high order type of energy, which is a high level of energy, to a more disordered type of energy, which is a lower level type of energy. If you're confused by this, you probably should be. Okay, here's the big picture. This is what you need to understand. The purpose for the existence of the second law of thermodynamics is to allow us to understand that no system is 100% efficient. That's the purpose of the second law of thermodynamics, is to let us know that no system is efficient. Okay, let me give you a for instance. For instance, how efficient is your car? What does this mean? Well, you go to the gasoline station, you pump gas into the car, right? You fill your tank, and then you drive your car. The question I'm asking you is how much of the energy in that gasoline, in the combustion of that gasoline, is being used to move your car forward, and how much of that energy is being wasted to the surroundings? Not being lost, because remember, energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's just being transformed into a different type of energy. So what do you think? What do you think the efficiency of your car is? Okay. Surprisingly, the efficiency of a typical car is around 20%. So that means out of all the energy in that gasoline, only 20% of that energy is being used to propel you forward, and the other 80% is being lost to the surroundings, okay, as a lower organized type of energy, which is heat, okay? If you don't believe me, put your hand, the back of your hand, gently okay, gently on the hood of your car, and you will feel the heat emanating from your engine. You could boil an egg. You could you could cook a steak. Approximately 80% of the energy in that gasoline is being lost to the environment. Okay, and that's what the second law of thermodynamics is telling us. It's telling us that every time that we have an energy transition from one type to another, a certain amount is going to be lost. Okay, let's go back to sharing the screen. Let's see. In line with the second law of thermodynamics, in every energy transaction, some energy will be lost to the most disordered form of energy, heat. Okay. How efficient do you guys think we are? A car's about 20%. How efficient are we? And the answer is somewhere in the 40 percentile. Our bodies are about 40% efficient. So 40% of the energy that we assimilate from food gets used into usable energy, and the other 60% gets dissipated from our bodies as heat. Okay, I think we just covered this, didn't we? Thus, in the operation of a car engine, only part of the energy released by the combustion of gasoline actually helps propel the car. The rest of the energy released in the combustion is lost. This is to heat. I think I want to say as heat. They're saying to heat because that's supposed to be an energy transfer. So entropy is a measure of the amount of disorder in a system. The greater the entropy, the greater the disorder. Okay. Hey, Mike. Hey, how are you? Good, good, good. So this is going to come as a major point in just a little bit. Okay. But when we're dealing with biological molecules, okay, funny things happen with the first and second law of thermodynamics, okay? And so this measurement of chaos or entropy is going to come back, okay? So this is a little metaphor that's put by our author. If I can move this thing out of the way, okay? So we got a little bit of coal here. It's burning, and as it burns, it heats some water. And as that water heats up, it turns into steam. And then as that steam goes into this little, I don't know what you call it, flywheel, okay? It's going to turn the flywheel, and then the steam is going to be lost, right? And you might think to yourself, what is the purpose of this machine? Obviously to turn this little flywheel. So this flywheel, you're either using it to sharpen something, or you're using it to run an alternator or a generator, something, okay? Now, why is this here? Because look at this. As we burn the coal and we cause it to warm up the water, we lose heat to the surroundings. So here's transition number one. Transition number one, see, even the author can't keep up with it. Transition number one is inside this box, because transition number one is the carbon-carbon bonds in the coal being turned into fire. So that's the first transition. So from here to here, literally, we haven't even gotten out of the box. But from here to here, we're losing energy, because this transition is not going to be 100%, okay? And you can see some of the heat loss here. Then, as this fire heats this boiler and makes the water heat up, going from fire to hot water, that's not 100% efficient. And there's going to be heat being lost to that as well. Then, as we go from water to steam, that's not 100% efficient. So we're going to lose some heat to that. And then finally, as that steam turns this flywheel, okay, so it turns this flywheel, it, I just realized I lost my stick here. It is not going to be 100% efficient. Why? Because the linear movement of the steam has to be turned into rotational mechanical energy, and there's friction in the bearings, and oh my gosh, so much garbage, you know. So how many losses do we have due to transitions? 1, 2, 3, 4. And at each transition, we lost energy. So consequently, this is going to be a very low efficiency machine. And this is the purpose for the second law of thermodynamics. Because this fire, contemplate this for a second, this fire is more chaotic than the organized carbon underneath it, than the organized charcoal. Are you with me? And this boiling water is more disorganized than the fire that's creating it. Okay? This heat is different than this heat. This one is more, this heat down here, like I said, I don't even know what this is. This heat down here is focused heat. This heat up here is dissipated heat, because you cannot say that the heat in the boiling water is as high as the heat in the fire. So this is more chaotic than this. Then as water turns into steam, the entropy or chaos increases significantly, because the water molecules are a lot more disorganized in steam than they are in the boiling water. Okay? Do you guys see how the second law of thermodynamics is working? We're going through different transitions. In each transition, we are getting energy that is less and less organized. And because the energy is becoming less and less organized, we are losing heat to the environment, and therefore the efficiency of the system is a lot less than 100%. And we're going to stop right there, and we'll come back in just a second. So this is fun. I hope you're enjoying it. Boy, this thing, I tell you. So to recap on the last few seconds, um, I ignore that. Stop. It didn't happen. Okay. Okay. So we're covering how's energy used by living things. Okay. And our author says living things can bring about local increases in order in themselves through their metabolic processes. Okay. So again, this is going to take a little bit of explaining. Let's pretend for a second that you have children, or if your grandparents, let's pretend that your grandchildren came by, and you have something to do. You have a call to make. You got a telephone call, or somebody came over, a salesman came over that you need to talk to. And what do? Against your better sense, you put the children in a room, and you go, okay, guys, behave. I'm only going to be busy for about 15 minutes. I'll be right back. Be on your best behavior. And then you close the door, you take care of your business for 15 minutes, and when you come back, you open the door and you're like, oh, what happened? The toys are flung everywhere. There's cookies all over the floor. There's milkshake on the windows. There's cats and dogs sleeping together. I mean, it's just a mess. It's just a mess. And your first instinct is to get upset with your children or grandchildren and go, what do you think you're doing? And you need to grab a hold of yourself, because all they are doing is exercising the second law of thermodynamics. They can't help themselves. They just said, they're just like, Grandma, we're just working out the second law of thermodynamics. What does this mean? This means that the universe, left to its own devices, is going to go from a point of high order to a point of very low order. Say in another way, low chaos to high chaos. Okay? Now, after you stop and finish being upset, can you fix this? The answer is yes, right? You get the broom, you get a shovel, you get a vacuum cleaner, you get some spray and some wipes. You clean the floor, you vacuum the rugs, you put the toys away, you wipe down the windows and the walls. Oh, and after some work, it all looks in order again. So you might think to yourself, wait a minute, did we just violate the second law of thermodynamics? Because isn't the second law of thermodynamics says that the universe is moving from order to disorder? How is it that we were to go from disorder to order? And the answer is you can do it all day long. The problem is that you have to invest energy. You have to put the energy in vacuuming and sweeping and wiping and whatever else. Does that make sense? So imagine yourself as a little bubble of order in a universe of chaos. Okay? We are incredibly ordered organisms. Why? Because we have DNA that can only be in a certain order. We have membranes that can only be in a certain order. We have proteins that can only be in a certain order. We have cells that can only organize in a certain order. The list goes on. We are literally pockets of very high order in a very disorganized universe. Again, are we violating the second law of thermodynamics? No. Our bodies invest a lot of energy making sure that DNA is made just the way it's supposed to be, making sure that protein is made just the way it's supposed to be, making sure that membranes are just where they're supposed to be made. Okay? So the second law of thermodynamics tells us that because we are ordered organisms, we are always going to be consuming food to harvest energy in order to maintain this high level of order. The day we die, no matter how much energy gets invested into your body, there's going to be no order. We're going to go into disorder. Does that make sense? So, living things can bring about local increases in order in themselves through the metabolic processes when what? When we invest energy to do it. Okay? So they can build what? Starches, proteins, sugars, amino acids. All this can be done, but it takes energy to do this. Do you see that? It takes energy to do this. Incidentally, there's a word for this, okay? When you take small molecules, like say nucleotides, and make DNA or RNA, when you go from the small to the large, that is called anabolism. So you take a single sugar and you make it into a string of sugar to make starch or glycogen, okay? That's called anabolism. You take amino acids to make proteins. You're taking 20 amino acids and you're putting them in a very specific order to make proteins. That's called anabolism, okay? Now, what did we just say? We are organizing things, right? Anytime that we're making nucleic acids, anytime that we're making proteins, anytime that we're making starches or glycogen, anytime that we're assembling membranes, we are organizing things, okay? So what does this mean? It means that it takes energy. So this means that anabolic reactions that assemble small molecules into large molecules can be done, but they're the ones that require energy, okay? So energy in living things is stored in endergonic uphill reactions in which the products of the reaction contain more energy than the starting substances. So this is cool. You know why this is cool? Because I have a little drawy thing here. Let me see if I can use my little drawy thing. Here goes nothing. Okay. So I'm going to try to draw an endergonic reaction. So we're going to start here. We're going to go up. And then we're going to go down. And then we're going to flatten out. That is an endergonic reaction. Okay. Over here in the bottom, we have reactants. And I put an R for reactants. Reactants. Over here at the top, we have products. Because usually, when you draw, this is called a reaction coordinate. Okay. And this has two axes. We have an axis here, and we have an axis here. The horizontal axis is typically time. And the dependent variable is usually energy, okay? So the higher you go, the more energy, okay? So energy in living things is stored away in endergonic. It means into uphill reactions. See what it means by uphill? We start downhill and we end up uphill. Imagine a marble down here and a marble up here, okay? Like so. Uphill means that this marble has to go from a low energy level to a higher energy level here at the end of products. We're not paying attention to this part right here. This is a different animal that we're going to cover in a little bit. This is called an activation, energy of activation or activation barrier, okay? So reactions in which the products of the reaction, that's this ball bearing up here, contain more energy than the starting substances, which is this guy down here, okay? So if the product has more energy, here's a product, if the product has more energy than the reactant, and time is going in this direction, okay, then I ask you, that's an arrow, can you tell it that's an arrow? I ask you, did we invest energy, or did we did we harvest energy? If you said that we invested energy, that is correct. Well, how do we know? Because the end has more energy than the beginning. And the only way that that can happen is if we invested energy. How much? Well, here's the beginning, here's the end. We invested this much energy from here to here. That's how much energy we invested. So this is an uphill reaction in which the products of the reaction contain more energy than the starting substances or reactants. This is an investment of energy. So this is endergonic. We have to invest energy. So this is an anabolic reaction. Anytime they have to invest energy in something, you're putting things together. That's an anabolic reaction. So you're making DNA, you're making proteins, you're making glycogen, you're making starch, you're making membranes, you're putting things together. This is an endergonic reaction. Okay, let's see. Let's go to the next one. Uh-oh, now I need to erase everything. Wait, there's a way to do this quickly. Clear, I think it's clear. Clear alter, oh, look at that. I'm getting so good at this, I'm loving it. Okay, now I gotta go back to my word drawing thing. Okay, conversely, in the other direction, energy is released in an exergonic downhill reaction, in which the reactants contain more energy than the products. So let's see if I can draw one of those, okay? So we start right about here. We go to the right. We go up. And then we go down. And we level out. We level out, okay? So this is exergonic. Exer means out, going out, okay? Exergonic. This is a downhill reaction. Why downhill? Well, here's one ball bearing. Here's the other ball bearing, right? This ball bearing is lower than this ball bearing. So this is a downhill reaction. Again, we don't pay attention to this hump in the middle, which is called the activation energy. We're gonna hit that in a second, okay? So, in which the reactants, that's these guys, contain more energy than the products, that's these guys. How much more energy? Well, just like before, we're gonna draw a line across like so. And the difference in energy is the difference between the energy of the reactants, which is this line right here, and the energy of the products, which is this energy right here. So the amount of energy that got released was this much. Okay, that amount. What else should we know? Well, let me ask you the other question. If endergonic reactions or uphill reactions are anabolic, because you're taking small molecules and turning them into big molecules, then what's an exergonic reaction? And what are we doing? Well, in an exergonic reaction, we're taking large molecules, we're breaking them into small molecules, okay? So in this case, we would take glycogen and break it down into individual glucose, or we would take a protein and break it down into individual amino acids, or we would take, you know, what's another? Oh, fats. We would take fats and break fats down, okay? And then what are we doing? We're harvesting energy. So we're in endergonic reactions, we have to invest energy into the reaction. In exergonic reactions, we are harvesting, we're getting energy out of the reaction. Do you see how that's working? So, to recap, it takes energy to build stuff, but when you break it down, when we take big stuff and you break it into small pieces, you extract the energy from it. Now, this also has another name to it. It's called a catabolic reaction. So just like an endergonic reaction is anabolic, this reaction is catabolic, okay? The way that I remember is the way that Dr. McVeigh at OIT told us to remember it. Okay, she says that she has a cat that is very, very mean, and all that cat does around her furniture is break it apart into small pieces. Can you imagine? I think I would have. Well, I wouldn't shoot a cat, but I don't think I'd let him do that to my furniture. So imagine you got this cat tearing things down. Okay, that's a catabolic reaction. It's a reaction in which things are being broken into small pieces. Anabolic reaction is where small pieces are being turned into large pieces. Okay, let me clear my drawings here. And so the linkage of a simple sugar to form a complex carbohydrate is, you shouldn't even be told. You should know it by now. Simple sugars to a complex carbohydrate. We're going from small to big. If you go from small to big, you're doing what? You're investing energy, right? If you're investing energy, then it is energy going in, endergonic. It is also called what? An anabolic reaction. And are we harvesting energy or are we investing energy? Well, we're making a large molecule, so we're going to invest or input energy. Okay, now we're going the opposite direction. The breakdown of a complex carbohydrate, starch or glycogen, into a simple sugar like glucose is what? It's an exergonic reaction. Exergonic reaction means that we're extracting energy from it because we're going from large molecules to small molecules. Okay. This is also a catabolic reaction. Okay. And again, this is the release of energy. Okay. Now what? Well, now is big picture time. Okay. Because remember, if we're going to be pockets of order in a universe of disorder, the only way that we can do that is by investing energy to maintain order. The only way that we can do that is by extracting energy from the stuff that we eat. So what does this mean? That here we have endergonic and exergonic reactions are linked. In other words, I wish this would have been said the other way around. Exergonic and endergonic reactions are linked because the energy that is released by exergonic reactions is invested in endergonic reactions to carry out everything that we need to do in organizing our bodies. So when you have a strongly exergonic reaction providing energy for an essential endergonic reaction in your body, this is called a coupled reaction. Okay, so reactions in which an energy yielding, I think that's funny. Now the author decides to put them in the right order. Ugh. Okay, so reactions in which an energy yielding exergonic reaction powers an energy requiring endergonic reaction is called a coupled reaction. Now I'll give you a hint. What do you think? What do you think the exergonic reaction is going to be? If you had biology before, you could probably guess. If you haven't, you probably couldn't. But let's just say it's going to be the hydrolysis of this beautiful molecule we call ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Very, very important. Okay. So here we have it. Okay. We have in the liver and in the muscle, we have polymers of sugar called glycogen. Okay. And what our body does is when we need it, this glycogen is broken into simple sugars. And this is an unfortunate diagram. This is what happens when the author tries to simplify things too much. The energy is not harvested when glycogen gets turned into glucose. the energy gets harvested from the glucose itself. So this guy's here too early. Anyways, be that as it may, uh, sugar is put into your blood, and then the cells pick up the sugar and they harvest energy out of it. Okay, what are they making? ATP. Keeps on coming up. See how that keeps on coming up? Now, if you have too much sugar and you don't need it anymore, your body invests energy by turning into glycogen again. And then that glycogen goes back, it's either again in the liver or in the muscle. Okay. So you have this event, okay, where you have catabolic reactions producing energy, an exergonic reaction, and an anabolic reaction, endergonic reaction, which harvests, forgive me, which invests energy to produce a large molecule. And we are doing this all of the time, all the time. We're harvesting energy and we're investing it. Harvesting, investing it. Harvesting, investing it. If we don't have anything to invest the energy, now we really get in trouble because our body goes, oh, wait, we don't have anything to burn the energy in. We're going to build some fat. That's terrible, but what are you going to do? ATP, so the molecule most often used in living things to power a couple reactions is ATP. It doesn't triphosphate, you know. And, you know, I've had the question before. Why isn't glucose the molecule of energy? And there's a couple reasons. Number one is that ATP holds a lot more potential energy than glucose. And a lot of the things that we need to do as animals are very, very demanding. So if you need to do something that's very, very demanding, you have to use an exergonic reaction that yields a lot of energy. And the hydrolysis of ATP does this. Glucose does not do this. It does not provide as much energy as ATP. So consequently, evolutionarily, that's what our bodies recognizes, ATP, you know, and that's all that they use. Okay, the energy dispenser, ATP. So adenosine triphosphate is the most important energy transfer molecule in living things. There's occasionally, if you go into higher science, you'll hear about GTP, but that's occasionally. Usually it's ATP. Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. I know what I was going to say here. So, in animals, energy that's extracted from food is transferred to ATP. So for us, that would be glycolysis, or fats or proteins, is transferred to ATP. And this energy is used to drive an array of metabolic processes. Typically, what? Anabolic, right? Anabolic. Energy supplied by ATP is used, for example, to power muscle contraction and nerve signal transmission. This is very important. This impresses me because I actually made it through a great deal of my education without knowing this very important point, okay? And it bothered me. Nobody taught it to me. I had to figure it out on my own, and I just couldn't believe that could have such an incredible hole in my education, okay? But this is a sign that we're learning, okay? Your author tells you ATP's energy transfers power. Let's try it again. ATP's energy transfer powers stem from the fact that it contains 3 phosphate groups, each of which is negatively charged, meaning these groups repel each other. And then they leave it at that. I'll elaborate in just a second. ATP drives chemical reactions by donating its third phosphate group to them. In the process, it becomes a 2-phosphate molecule, adenosine diphosphate. Okay, so here's the ATP cycle. Okay, here's adenosine triphosphate. Now you got to be careful. Okay, if you're being asked what the parts of ATP are, it is the nitrogen containing group called adenine, not adenosine, adenine, and the ribose, the sugar ribose. Okay, adenosine is the sum of this nitrogen containing group, which is adenine, and ribose. But most assessments don't say it that way. They say, what are the 3 components? The 3 components would be adenine, the sugar ribose, and 3 phosphates. Okay? Now, take a look at these phosphates. Take a look at these phosphates. Do you see what's here? That's an oxygen, 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 that's an oxygen. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of oxygen. What happens? Let's go to P table. And let's take a look at properties, and let's take a look at electronegativity. Do you guys remember this? Here's oxygen, here's fluorine. These are the most electronegative elements on the periodic table. See where oxygen is? Very negative. Electronegativity, if you've forgotten, is electron hunger, or the trait of wanting to pull electron density towards itself. Okay? That's oxygen. Look how electronegative it is. It has a very net negative charge to it. Now, you can take a molecule that has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 oxygens around it. Are you kidding me? Can you imagine how much negative character there is between this phosphate and this phosphate? Okay? So picture for yourself, if you will, here's a phosphate. You see me? Here's a phosphate, and here's a phosphate. And this guy's really negative, and this guy's really negative. Do they want to be next to each other? No, not even a little bit. Now we're going to do something worse. We're going to do this. Click. We're going to do that. What did we just do? We made a covalent bond. This little guy right here. And these guys are not happy. They do not want to be next to each other. They hate each other. So if you have something that's like this, and it has that much strain because of how negative this guy is and how negative this guy is, what do you think that's called? That's called potential energy. Is it a little bit of potential energy? No. It's a lot of potential energy because these phosphate groups hate each other. This would be analogous to us taking a very strong spring, pushing it together, and then locking it in place, right? So what do you think happens when an enzyme comes in here and covalently breaks this covalent bond here? What do you think happens? Does this guy go da 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 da? No. That potential energy goes into kinetic energy. This thing comes out of here like a bullet out of a gun. It has a lot of kinetic energy, and it needs it because the molecules, the enzymes, the proteins that this thing has to move are huge. And the only way that that can be done is by transferring ridiculous amount of potential energy into ridiculous amount of kinetic energy. And the guy to do it, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Okay. Now, the problem is that whenever we do that, we end up with adenosine diphosphate. We end up losing a phosphate. There's some reactions that actually hydrolyze two phosphates. Those require even more energy, if you can believe that. Okay. The thing that should be blowing your mind right now is that if this releases a significant amount of energy right now, then what magic makes this guy be pressed on this ADP again in order to turn it into ATP? Whoa, wait a minute. That means that in our bodies, there's something even more powerful than ATP? Yes. And that is the topic of chapter 7. So I'm going to leave that cliffhanger there. But there's something in our bodies even more powerful than ATP that is responsible for taking this phosphate, this inorganic phosphate, hooking it back onto this ADP to make ATP again. So this ATP has a lot of energy. This ADP still has energy, but not as much. Okay. Now I'm going to stop. Okay. I apologize about the previous one, but now I'm going to stop. So thank you. See you in a bit.